Howdy, gang. So I'm not the one to sell you stuff, because that's half of my purpose of this channel, is to save you money. Save you monies. So I spend it for you, right? Okay. But every once in a while, something cool comes along. It gets overhyped most of the time. We've discussed this. However, in this case, I think I found something really cool that's worth it. And that's this GFI Systems Duophony. And the Duophony allows you to parallel blend multiple signals, 2 signals, 4 signals, however many pedals you connect to it. Now that might sound like, what? Okay, yeah, that's cool, but why is that such a big deal? Well, to some people it's not. I'm going to show you why I think it's a big deal and not hype. This isn't a paid thing. I bought this from Sound Parcel in PA, full price, and it was worth it. And it's worth it for me for a couple of reasons. The first of which is, and I don't know if everybody's looking at it from this point of view. I've seen people discuss that you can do wet, dry, wet with it, or wet, dry. But for me, the fact that you can parallel mix a couple of different signals, and in this case, we're doing the GenLoss Mark II by Chase Bliss and the Earthquaker Devices Afterneath V3. And those 2 pedals in particular are important for me, and here's why. So I love the GenLoss Mark II. I've tried it in several configurations. However, sometimes in series, I find it a bit overbearing. Even when I bring some dry signal in, like I dial in what I like, but then the noise factor and the swirl factor and the saturation where I like it affects too many other things in the chain, let's put it that way. But I love it. The Afterneath, similarly, I love what it does, but it's just a little bit much. Even I know the mix knob, I get it, but it's just like, well, if I could use the mix knob and blend it and do some other things and change the other values like an LFO and the gain of it in the signal chain. Yeah, so that's what the Duophony from GFI System does. Important thing to mention before we go any further is some things that haven't been mentioned in many other demos is, okay, the Duophony is not complicated. I know all these demos made it look complicated, and if you look at the signal chain flow online diagrams, your head might explode. It's actually way simpler than that. You have a mix between the X and Y, the left and right, whatever you're mixing, right? So if you have 2 pedals like I do, you can mix. So maybe I want the GenLoss to have 60% in the blend and the Afterneath to have 40. You can do that. The next part of it is how much dry signal you can have in that signal chain. In this example, there will be 100% dry, because that's what I'm personally trying to recover. I'm trying to have as much as my dry signal have the effects in it without being, for lack of a better word, tainted. So, window 1 is the XY blend between the 2 sides. Window 2 is dry blend. And then window 3, if you keep pressing, so you press this middle button. I don't know if you can see this down here, but so this middle button does XY, dry signal, and then speed and depth of the LFO. Now, that LFO is really cool because, yeah, of course, it affects whatever's in the loop, but it will continue to pulse whatever is in that loop, even when you're not playing, thus sort of giving you the texture of those pedals when you're not playing. That's really cool. So there's a lot of sub-menu stuff and other stuff like globals and, whether you have panning or normal feature. I've got panning. There's a lot of other things you can do, but the basic of what this pedal does is what I'm saying is very simple. A lot more simple than it's made out to be. You can make it as complicated as you want. Okay. Now, you have a send and a return for each channel, left and right, X and Y. And if your pedal is stereo, like the Generation Loss Mark II stereo, the signal into the Duophony is mono. So no reason to send less than a mono signal, in my opinion. I may be wrong. But so you send a mono signal into the gen loss, right? But the gen loss produces a stereo signal. So you take a TRS cable, and that's what returns. You've got stereo. It's also got an expression pedal input, so you can control some of these things like the LFO and other factors with expression. That's really cool too. Now, so the gen loss is stereo. The afterneath is mono. So you just have a mono send and a mono return. Now, what happens if you have a stereo signal on one side, on the X side, and there's a mono on the Y? I'll tell you what happens, because I had a discussion with Henry at GFI System. He's so cool, he answered a bunch of my questions. So the generation loss will be in stereo. The afterneath, because it's in mono, will be straight up the middle. So you'll have the gen loss and then the afterneath up the middle, like that, okay? But where it really gets cool is if you have two stereo signals. Eventually, I ordered the Mood Mark II, which should be here any day from Chase Bliss, and that will go in the afterneath slot because I want to have an extra little texture, a morphy kind of reverb texture to go along with the gen loss. I also want to have, a little bit of granular clock goodness, sampling and whatnot. So that will be perfect for this slot. So I'll have two stereo parallel effects. So here it is without anything. This is just my signal. So this is all being recorded direct, by the way. So that's why I wanted you to hear that fading out again. That's this pedal board, which is, some drive, the Drolo strands, some drives, and then the Duophony with the gen loss and the afterneath. So all you're hearing right now is the black bobbin boost and the page from Kingsley. And that's your tail. This board is running into the HX effects, and I have an effects loop, a stereo effects loop set up in the HX effects, and the Duophony and the gen loss and the afterneath are in that stereo effects loop. This is without the Duophony. and this is with. Now you can hear the LFO cycling. Cool. Pretty cool. Now, normally in a effects loop, say like you can relate this to a bus. If you were doing busing in a mix session, you would set up a bus with an effect on it, and then in the bus channel, you would blend how much goes to that effect. The effect on that bus channel is almost always, at least from my experience, wet, right? Because you're just bringing in how much of that effect you want. I experimented with that with the Duophony. It works. You can put both of these effects totally wet. You may have to change the settings that you found before you made them wet. That's number one. Number two, one effect may or may not be more overbearing, 100% wet than the other one, and vice versa. And number three, then you're locked in to the mix being entirely in here in the Duophony, but then even if you have your dry 100%, you're still getting full wet in. So unless you reduce that wet, which you can do, by the way, each channel has its own level, so you could do that. I found the best way was finding the blend between the two effects I wanted to use, setting that on the face of the Duophony, and then fine-tuning the mix in each individual effect. The Gen Loss Mark II has a switch for no dry, a little dry, or unity dry, and the Afterneath has a mix knob. The Gen Loss also has a volume. So it's gonna, my recommendation is it may differ on each effect, okay? But you can do it fully wet. You can do it like a bus channel, fully wet, and then do everything else in the Duophony, or you can do it mix and match. It totally depends on balances, in my recommendation. Now, you can have no LFO. As I said before, you could have the expression control do a lot of this stuff. There's a lot of coolness in this device. Just for the sake of showing you what I was talking about earlier about fully wet, we're gonna go fully wet with both of these. Go back to our first preset. Oh yeah, there's presets. You can save presets. I am probably not gonna, with just two pedals, I'm not gonna have a need for more than two, because to me it's all about the blend and then different LFO speeds. And then I'll probably program it for an expression pedal, but now we're going to show you both pedals fully wet, but blended into the Duophony. So anyway, that's the Duophony. Like I said, you can do wet, dry, wet. You can do wet, dry. You can do parallel. I only wanted it for parallel because I was finding some effects were just kind of getting in the way of my signal. And therefore, I thought, wow, this could be really cool. And it for me, it just adds a little bit of texture, the best of the pedals in the loop without messing with my dry signal too much. I find that really exciting. So, not too expensive. I mean, I spent, if you look at my wet, dry, wet video, I spent $1,100 on a custom junction box. So, for $300, this is a pretty good deal. It can't do everything my custom junction box did, but a lot of you probably don't need to spend $1,100 on a custom junction box for wet, dry, wet. So if you want wet, dry, wet, dry, or parallel, or like myself, you have a couple of pedals that were just a little overbearing in your chain, but you wanted the little texture that they gave you, I think this is a winner. So check it out.